New calls for the government to speed up compensation for victims of the infected blood scandal. A leading campaigner, the Labour MP Dame Diana Johnson, told the Commons that the NHS had a very serious criminal and ethical issue to answer following reports that children were involved in trials of blood products without their parents' consent. Here is our parliamentary correspondent, Sean Curran.
Last December, Rishi Sunak suffered his first Commons defeat as Prime Minister when Tory rebels backed a call from the Labour MP, Dame Diana Johnson, to speed up efforts to compensate victims of the contaminated blood scandal in the 1970s and 80s. Tens of thousands of people were infected with HIV or hepatitis C. The final report from the public inquiry into the disaster is due next month. The scandal is often referred to as the worst tragedy in the history of the NHS. There was a grim twist last week when the BBC and Sunday Times reported that children had been given contaminated blood as part of medical trials without their parents' consent.
These disturbing revelations raise very serious criminal and ethical issues for the NHS and the medical profession, possibly breaches of the 1947 Nuremberg Code.
The Nuremberg Code sets out the research principles for human experiments, including stressing the importance of consent. Diana Johnson, who leads the all-party group on haemophilia and contaminated blood, said more than 160 MPs from 10 parties backed the campaign for compensation to be paid now to those infected and affected by the scandal. She'd asked an urgent question, a parliamentary device to bring ministers to the dispatch box to face the Commons, asking what the government was going to do about these latest reports. A Cabinet Office Minister, John Glenn, said he couldn't preempt the findings of the public inquiry, which will be published on the 20th of May.
The stories reported in the recent BBC News article, and indeed in the Sunday Times reporting of Caroline Wheeler, demonstrate the unimaginable suffering of all of those impacted by this dreadful scandal.
The government has made interim payments of £100,000 each to about 4,000 victims and some bereaved partners, and the minister said it was setting up a UK-wide infected blood compensation scheme. His Labour opposite number, Dame Nia Griffith, said time was of the essence.
Nobody could fail to be moved by the scale of the horror and of the injustice of this scandal. And the latest revelations about apparent experiments on children, to which this urgent question relates, are truly appalling and show yet again how badly the victims have been let down.
The SNP's Alison Thewlis also raised the reports that children had been used in medical trials.
These parents should not be burdened with this guilt. There's an estimated 380 children who were infected in a massive breach of trust and medical ethics. It is every parent's worst nightmare. So what does he say to these parents of children who were used as guinea pigs? An utterly despicable practice, but made the worse by the lack of redress for those families.
The minister said he had deep respect for the victims' suffering. The former Conservative Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, who now sits as an independent, said the latest reports had strengthened the moral case for the government to address the wrong that had been done.
Can I push the minister to move as fast as possible, but also hold in his mind the absolutely critical nature of getting the response right as well as fast?
A Liberal Democrat, Wendy Chamberlain, said some families had received neither compensation nor an apology.
It is very clear that not only have they lost loved ones to a preventable and painful death, but the stigma that those loved ones lived with during their life is part of the issue.
A Labour MP, Paulette Hamilton, said one of her constituents had contacted her. His father and uncles had been infected with contaminated blood.
And he said to me, I had to grow up in care homes due to my father being too ill to look after me. We have been fighting for many, many years for justice. He thinks the government are dragging their feet on compensating victims. He's right, isn't he?
John Glenn said he couldn't comment on what had happened before he became responsible for the issue, but he said the government's response to the scandal would need to be addressed when the final report was published next month.
Sean Curran, and you can hear more on events yesterday in Parliament at 9 o'clock on Radio 4 Extra.